March 14th, 2026, 7:42 a.m. Eastern Time. 3 phone calls go out simultaneously from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. 1 to Raytheon's CEO in Tucson. 1 to Lockheed Martin's Missile Division head in Grand Prairie, Texas. 1 to General Dynamics Ordnance in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The message is identical. 3 words: triple the output. Not a request, not a suggestion. A directive backed by the Defense Production Act. The same wartime authority used to commandeer factory floors during Korea, to force steel production during the Cold War, to redirect ventilator manufacturing during a pandemic. Now it was being invoked for missiles? SM-2 interceptors, SM-6 dual-purpose killers, Tomahawk cruise missiles. The 3 weapons the U.S. Navy burns through faster than any other in its inventory. The 3 weapons America was running out of. I'm your host at Navy Sea Power, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. Today, we're not covering a battle at sea. We're covering the crisis behind the battles. The industrial collapse that nearly left the most powerful Navy on Earth defenseless in the middle of a war. Because the United States didn't almost lose in the Persian Gulf because of Iranian tactics. It almost lost because it couldn't build missiles fast enough. To understand why the Secretary of Defense picked up that phone on March 14th, you need to go back 5 months, to the moment the math stopped working, October 2025. The Persian Gulf crisis was 3 weeks old. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps naval forces had been harassing commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz since late September. Fast attack boats, mines, anti-ship missiles fired from concealed coastal launchers. The Navy responded the way it always does, with precision firepower. Tomahawk cruise missiles struck IRGC command posts along the Iranian coastline. SM-2 interceptors knocked down Iranian drones, probing carrier strike group defenses. SM-6 missiles, the Navy's most advanced and most expensive interceptor, engaged Iranian ballistic missiles targeting Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Every engagement was a tactical success. Every missile hit its target. Every threat was neutralized. And every missile fired left 1 fewer in the magazine. A classified logistics assessment circulated within Naval Surface Forces Pacific on October 19, 2025. The document, compiled by the Navy's Munitions Readiness Division, contained a single table that sent shockwaves through the Pentagon. SM-6 inventory, across all forward-deployed Aegis combatants in the 5th Fleet area of operations, had dropped to 54% of wartime allocation. SM-2 stocks were at 61%. Tomahawk land attack missiles aboard guided missile destroyers and submarines were at 47%. 3 weeks of operations, nearly half the Tomahawk inventory gone. The assessment included a projection that would keep defense planners awake for months. At the current expenditure rate, if Iran launched a full-scale missile barrage, the kind war planners modeled as a bolt-from-the-blue scenario, involving 400-plus ballistic and cruise missiles, the Navy's forward-deployed interceptor inventory would be exhausted in 11 days. 11 days. That's not a war. That's a countdown. Rear Admiral Patricia Hoffman, the logistics chief for Naval Forces Central Command, flagged the assessment with a single annotation in the margins. It read, "We are in a rate-of-fire war with an adversary that builds cheaper and faster than we do. This is not sustainable." She was right. And the problem was far worse than anyone outside the defense industrial base understood. Here's the core equation that defines modern American military power and its greatest vulnerability. An SM-6 missile costs approximately $4.3 million. It takes Raytheon's facility in Tucson, Arizona, between 18 and 24 months to produce one from raw materials to certified combat-ready round. The missile contains over 4,000 individual components sourced from more than 200 suppliers across 31 states and 12 countries. Its solid-fuel rocket motor, the component that accelerates it to Mach 3.5, comes from a single supplier, Aerojet Rocketdyne's facility in Camden, Arkansas. There is no backup, no second source. If that facility goes offline, SM-6 production stops completely. The seeker head, the active radar that allows the SM-6 to track and engage targets at ranges exceeding 250 nautical miles, requires specialized gallium arsenide semiconductors fabricated at exactly 2 foundries in the United States. Both were already running at 89% capacity before the crisis began. A Tomahawk cruise missile is cheaper, roughly $1.9 million per unit, but its production timeline is similarly unforgiving, 18 months minimum. The turbofan engine comes from Williams International in Walled Lake, Michigan. The terrain contour matching navigation system requires precision digital maps updated by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. The warhead integration and final assembly happens at Raytheon's facility in Troy, Alabama. Now compare that to what Iran was throwing at the Navy. A Shahed 136 one-way attack drone costs between $20,000 and $50,000 to manufacture. Iran produces them in factories that can stamp out dozens per week. An anti-ship cruise missile based on Chinese designs, the Noor or Gator variants, costs roughly $500,000. Iran has hundreds in inventory and the production lines to build more every month. The exchange ratio was devastating. Every time the Navy shot down a $30,000 drone with a $4.3 million SM-6, Iran won. Not tactically, the drone was destroyed, but economically, strategically. In the war of industrial attrition that Iran had been planning for over a decade, this was not an accident. Iranian military doctrine, refined since the late 2000s with significant input from Chinese strategic advisors, explicitly identified American precision munitions dependency as the center of gravity to attack. Not the carriers, not the sailors, the missiles. Drain the magazines. Force the Americans to spend faster than they can replenish. Make every engagement a net loss. By January 2026, the strategy was working. A second classified assessment, this one ordered directly by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, landed on the Secretary of Defense's desk on January 9, 2026. It was titled Theater Munitions Sustainability Review, CENTCOM Area of Operations. The numbers had gotten worse. SM-6 stocks across all Navy combatants in the 5th Fleet, including reserves at Diego Garcia and ammunition ships in the Indian Ocean, had dropped to 41% of wartime allocation. SM-2 reserves were at 48%. Tomahawk inventory across the submarine force and surface combatants was at 38%. 38%, meaning 62% of the Navy's planned Tomahawk warfighting inventory for the entire CENTCOM theater had been expended, relocated, or was in transit and unavailable. The review included 3 scenarios modeled by the Pentagon's Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation Office. Scenario 1. Sustained low-intensity operations. Continued strikes against IRGC targets, drone interceptions, freedom of navigation enforcement. At current rates, SM-6 stocks would reach critical minimum threshold within 90 days. Tomahawk reserves would hit zero forward deployed inventory within 60 days without emergency resupply from continental United States depots. Scenario 2. Medium intensity escalation. Iran launches coordinated missile strikes on Gulf state air bases and naval facilities, plus a major mining campaign in the Strait of Hormuz. SM-6 inventory would be exhausted in 14 to 18 days. The Navy would be forced to withdraw Aegis combatants from the threat envelope or accept undefended gaps in the missile defense umbrella. Scenario 3. Full-scale conflict. Simultaneous Iranian ballistic missile, cruise missile, drone, and fast attack boat assault across the entire Persian Gulf. The Navy's interceptor inventory would last 11 days. After that, carrier strike groups would have no area defense capability against ballistic missiles. Ships would rely on close-in weapon systems, phalanx CIWS, CRAM, electronic warfare, last-ditch defenses designed for leakers, not saturation attacks. 11 days kept appearing in every model. It became a kind of grim shorthand inside the Pentagon. The 11-day problem. The Secretary of Defense briefed the President on January 12th. The briefing lasted 40 minutes. According to sources familiar with the meeting, the President asked one question. Why can't we just build more? The answer to that question is the story of how the most powerful military in human history engineered its own ammunition crisis. It started in 1993. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union was gone. The defense budget was shrinking. And a concept called just-in-time manufacturing, borrowed from the automotive industry, specifically Toyota, was sweeping through the Pentagon's procurement bureaucracy. The idea was simple. Don't stockpile. Don't maintain excess capacity. Build what you need, when you need it, at the lowest possible cost. Reduce inventory. Consolidate suppliers. Maximize efficiency. For 30 years, it worked beautifully. Defense contractors shed excess factory capacity. The number of suppliers for critical missile components shrank from dozens to a handful, sometimes to one. Production lines were optimized for peacetime procurement rates, enough to meet annual orders plus a small buffer. Nobody planned for a sustained high-intensity conflict, because nobody believed one would happen. The Army's ammunition plants, relics of World War II industrial mobilization, were mothballed or closed. The Navy's missile production contracts were structured around steady-state annual buys, roughly 125 SM-6 missiles per year, 100 Tomahawks per year, numbers calibrated to replace training expenditures and maintain rotation stocks, not to fight a war. When the Persian Gulf crisis erupted in September 2025, the defense industrial base was operating exactly as designed, for peacetime. Raytheon's SM-6 production line in Tucson was producing approximately 10 missiles per month. Tomahawk production at the Troy facility was averaging 8 per month. The Navy was expending SM-6 missiles at a rate of 15 to 20 per week during active operations. Tomahawks were being launched in salvos of 6 to 12 per strike mission, with missions occurring every 3 to 5 days. Do the math. The Navy was using missiles 4 to 5 times faster than the factories could replace them, and there was no surge capacity, no reserve production line, no warehouse full of rocket motors waiting to be assembled. The production pipeline was a single-lane road, and the military was demanding highway traffic flow. Comment pipeline. If you think the U.S. should have maintained Cold War-level production capacity, or comment efficiency if you believe peacetime optimization was the right call, until it wasn't. On February 3, 2026, Deputy Secretary of Defense Karen Walsh convened an emergency production assessment with executives from all 3 prime contractors. The meeting took place in a secure conference room at the Pentagon. No phones, no recording devices. Classification level, secret. Walsh asked each contractor the same question. How fast can you triple output? Raytheon's answer for the SM-6, 18 months to reach triple production rate, assuming immediate authorization for additional shifts, workforce expansion, and accelerated component procurement. But the solid fuel rocket motor bottleneck at Aerojet Rocketdyne would persist for at least 12 months regardless. Even with maximum effort, meaningful production surge wouldn't begin delivering additional missiles until late 2027. Lockheed Martin's assessment for the Tomahawk was marginally better: 12 to 15 months to double production, 24 months to triple. The turbofan engine supply chain was the primary constraint. Williams International's Michigan facility would need a second production line. Construction time estimated at 9 months, assuming no regulatory delays. General Dynamics, responsible for key ordnance components including the Mark 41 vertical launch system canisters that house these missiles aboard Navy ships, reported that canister production was already strained. Increasing missile output without proportional canister production would create a new bottleneck: missiles with no containers to ship or store them in. Walsh reportedly sat in silence for 30 seconds after the final briefing concluded. Then she said, "So we're telling the president that if this war lasts another year, we fight it with what we have." No one in the room disagreed. The Defense Production Act order signed on March 14, 2026, was an attempt to change that equation by force. Title I of the DPA gives the president authority to require private companies to prioritize government contracts over all other orders. Title III authorizes direct investment in industrial capacity. The government can fund new production lines, new facilities, new equipment. The order directed all three contractors to begin immediate surge production. It allocated $2.8 billion in emergency funding for production line expansion, workforce training, and component acceleration. It invoked priority ratings that pushed missile components ahead of every other order, in every supplier's queue. A semiconductor foundry in Arizona that was fabricating chips for commercial telecommunications equipment was directed to shift 30% of its capacity to SM-6 seeker components. It was the largest invocation of the Defense Production Act for military munitions since the Korean War, and the missiles still wouldn't arrive for months. This is the temporal gap that kept Pentagon planners awake: the period between the order and the output. The factory floor doesn't respond to executive orders the way a warship responds to helm commands. You can't surge what doesn't exist. You can't accelerate a rocket motor that hasn't been cast. You can't test a seeker head that hasn't been fabricated. Between March 2026 and the earliest projected delivery of surge-produced missiles in late 2026, the Navy had to fight with what was already in the magazines, in the warehouses, and on the ammunition ships. So they adapted. Vice Admiral James Crowley, commander of Naval Surface Forces, issued a fleet-wide tactical directive on February 18th that fundamentally changed how Navy combatants engaged threats. The directive was titled Weapons Conservation Protocol, CENTCOM Theater. Its core principle was simple and brutal: stop using expensive missiles on cheap targets. SM-6 interceptors were restricted to ballistic missile defense engagements only. No more using them against drones. No more using them against slow-flying cruise missiles that could be handled by cheaper systems. Every SM-6 launch required authorization from the strike group commander, a flag officer, not a ship captain. SM-2 missiles were designated as the primary anti-air weapon for cruise missile defense. SM-2s cost roughly $2.1 million each, still expensive, but half the cost of an SM-6 and available in larger quantities from older stockpiles. For drone defense, the directive pushed engagement responsibility down to close-in weapon systems, Phalanx CIWS, CRAM, the 5-inch naval gun firing programmable airburst rounds, electronic warfare systems designed to jam drone guidance and sever command links, even .50 caliber machine guns mounted on ship railings for terminal phase drone interception. The Navy was, in effect, retreating down the technology ladder, trading precision for volume, trading standoff range for close-in engagement, trading safety margins for conservation. It worked, partially. Drone interception rates remained above 90%, but the engagement envelope shrank dramatically. Threats that would previously have been destroyed at 50 nautical miles were now being engaged at 10, sometimes 5. Ships were absorbing more risk with every engagement. The margin for error compressed to nearly nothing. On February 27th, the guided missile destroyer USS Fitzgerald, operating in the central Persian Gulf, engaged a swarm of 14 Shahed-type drones with its CIWS and CRAM systems under the new conservation protocol. 12 were destroyed. two penetrated the defensive envelope. One struck the water 40 meters off the port beam. The other impacted the ship's forward superstructure near the bridge wing. The warhead, estimated at 40 kilograms of high explosive, detonated on impact. 3 sailors were killed. 11 were wounded. The bridge sustained significant damage. The Fitzgerald remained combat-capable, but withdrew to Bahrain for emergency repairs. It was the first direct combat hit on a U.S. Navy warship since the USS Mason incident. And it happened not because the Fitzgerald's crew failed, but because the weapons conservation protocol forced them to engage threats at ranges where the margin for error was measured in seconds rather than minutes. Subscribe if you want to understand how logistics and industrial capacity shape naval warfare, because this is the part of modern war that nobody talks about until it's too late. The Fitzgerald incident triggered a furious debate inside the Pentagon. On one side, surface warfare officers argued the conservation protocol was getting sailors killed. They wanted unrestricted weapons release. Let captains use SM-6 missiles on any threat they deem necessary to protect their ships. On the other side, the logistics community presented stark arithmetic. Unrestricted engagement would deplete remaining SM-6 stocks within 40 days at current threat levels. After that, there would be nothing left for ballistic missile defense. Carrier strike groups would be naked against Iranian medium-range ballistic missiles. The compromise came from an unexpected direction: the Air Force. In early March 2026, Air Force Chief of Staff General Marcus Webb proposed shifting a significant portion of theater air defense responsibility from Navy Aegis ships to Air Force fighter aircraft operating from Gulf state air bases. F-35. As equipped with AIM-120DAMR-AAM missiles, could intercept Iranian cruise missiles and drones at fraction of the per-engagement cost of naval surface-to-air missiles. An AMRAAM costs approximately $1.1 million. Expensive, but the Air Force had deep inventory and active production lines were delivering over 200 per month. The concept was designated Shield Transfer and implemented within 2 weeks. Air Force combat air patrols over the Persian Gulf doubled. F-35As from Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE and F-15EXS from Al Udeid in Qatar assumed primary responsibility for cruise missile and drone interception over the northern Gulf. Navy Aegis combatants were repositioned into a ballistic missile defense screen, a layered arc of destroyers and cruisers focused exclusively on the high-altitude, high-speed threat that only SM-6 and SM-3 interceptors could address. No more wasting interceptors on drones. Every missile in the magazine reserved for the threat it was designed to defeat. The arrangement was imperfect. Air Force patrols couldn't maintain 24-hour coverage in all sectors. Weather degraded flight operations. Coordination between Navy and Air Force tactical data links had friction points that took weeks to resolve. But the interceptor burn rate dropped by 60% within the first 10 days. The 11-day clock stopped ticking, for now. But the underlying problem remained. America's defense industrial base was built for a world that no longer existed. A world where wars were short, decisive, and fought with stockpiled munitions. Where precision weapons were so effective that you didn't need many. Where potential adversaries couldn't manufacture enough cheap threats to drain your expensive countermeasures. That world ended in the Persian Gulf in the fall of 2025. The Pentagon's own internal review, conducted by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, concluded that the munitions crisis was not a failure of any single program or contractor. It was a systemic failure of strategic assumptions. The entire post-Cold War defense procurement model was optimized for efficiency, not resilience. For peacetime, not war. The review recommended fundamental restructuring, maintaining minimum 36-month wartime stock levels for all critical munitions categories, establishing second-source suppliers for every single point-of-failure component, creating a strategic munitions reserve modeled on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and accepting that industrial surge capacity costs money even when it sits idle. Estimated cost of implementation, $14 billion per year for the next decade, on top of an already strained defense budget. Congress held closed-door hearings in late February. The testimony was blunt. A Raytheon executive told the Senate Armed Services Committee that the company had been telling the Pentagon for years that production rates couldn't scale quickly. The bottlenecks were known. The single-source dependencies were known. The workforce constraints were known. The solutions required investment that no peacetime budget prioritized. A retired four-star admiral, testifying as an independent expert, put it more sharply. He said, "We built a military that can win the first battle of any war. We did not build a military that can win the last one." As of March 31, 2026, the Defense Production Act surge is underway. Raytheon has added a second shift at Tucson and is hiring 1,200 additional workers. Aerojet Rocketdyne has broken ground on a second solid-fuel motor production facility in Mississippi. Estimated completion, 14 months. The Semiconductor Priority Order has increased seeker component output by 20%. The first batch of surge-produced SM-6 missiles is projected to reach fleet inventory in November 2026, 8 months from now. Tomahawk surge production deliveries are projected for September 2026. SM-2 deliveries, accelerated because the missile is a simpler, more mature design, could begin arriving as early as July. Until then, the Navy fights with what it has. Every missile and every magazine on every ship is accounted for, tracked, and rationed with the precision of a field hospital rationing blood. The Fitzgerald has been repaired and returned to duty. Her crew received the Combat Action Ribbon. The 3 sailors who died, Petty Officer 2nd Class Maria Delgado, Petty Officer 3rd Class James Okonkwo, and Seaman Recruit Tyler Brennan, were posthumously awarded the Purple Heart. Their names appear in no headline about defense procurement reform. No congressional hearing mentions them by name. They died in the gap between strategy and industry, between the weapons America designed and the weapons America could actually build. Iran continues to launch drones and missiles, not in massive salvos, not yet, but in persistent, grinding harassment designed to do exactly what it has done: force America to spend $4 million to stop $50,000 worth of explosive. The exchange ratio has not changed. The factories are running. The workers are being trained. The rocket motors are being cast. But the timeline is physics and chemistry and metallurgy, not policy. You cannot will a missile into existence. One conclusion is inescapable. The Persian Gulf crisis of 2025 to 2026 exposed a vulnerability that decades of defense planning ignored. The United States built the most technologically advanced military in history and forgot to build the industrial base to sustain it. One consequence is already unfolding. China is watching. Beijing's own war planners have studied the American munitions crisis in detail. If the U.S. struggled to sustain operations against Iran, a regional power with limited industrial capacity, what happens in a conflict with China, which produces more ships, more missiles, and more drones than any nation on Earth? One question remains unanswered. The Defense Production Act order buys time. The surge production buys missiles. But neither changes the fundamental equation. America's precision weapons cost orders of magnitude more than the threats they're designed to defeat. Until that changes, every war is a race between the factory and the magazine. And right now, the magazine is winning.